and it played for about 6 weeks in Detroit, and then it opened in New York around Thanksgiving, and it played all the way through Christmas, and that was like in 70 theaters. It was doing really well. It played city by city, but it was like in a wide release in each city, so if you were in that city, it appeared to be a big movie, basically, and did really well, and then finally they took it to down south to Texas, and they got hit with a freak snowstorm, and it still did all right, but it didn't do the big numbers that it had done in the Northeast. So at that point, the producers panicked, and then they just took a really lucrative video deal and sent it to video.
Wow.
But it's fun to see it on the screen. I saw it like 2 years ago at a horror convention with an live audience, and it was a lot of fun. People were laughing at the right parts and, scared of the right parts.
All right, so you've got a 90-minute feature. Now, how long did it actually take to produce that 90-minute feature?
We shot for about 4 weeks.
Wow.
And it was a really good shoot. It was really easy because basically we had one location. There was one main location of a haunted house, which plays through most of the movie, and then a few other, assorted exterior locations. But we were able to plan our crew on this location. It was a fenced property, and we were totally self-contained. We had our production offices in parts of the building, and we had, we're shooting in other parts. Mm-hmm. So that made it really easy, because a big part of shooting a feature film is having to move your equipment from location to location, because that eats up a lot of time, and then when you're actually shooting, you're much more under the gun. And that's what happened on the second feature. We went from having basically one location in the first film to having 28 locations in the second one. And we had to do 28 locations in the same schedule, 24 days, basically.
My Lord.
So it was really insane.
You see, I don't think the majority of people who go to a movie, sit down, they have no concept what's behind it. And
I think that's a good thing.
It is?
I think more people today, like the kids especially, are more in tune. A lot of them go to fan sites, and they understand how the special effects are done and whatever, but to me, that takes a little bit of the magic away from it. I think that it's better to just lose yourself in the experience and do it. I mean, it's one thing if you're going to work in the industry and you have to understand all that stuff, but otherwise I think it's better to just go and enjoy the movie.
Now,
but it is a lot of work, and there's so many people that, even a low-budget film like ours, which cost about $1.2 million at the time, which was low budget back in the 80s when you had to shoot with 35mm film and, a huge crew. Today they make movies that, with the same type, now with all digital effects and everything, you can do a film for $100,000 that would, have the same production value, basically.
Tell me about your book, your new book that you've just completed. It's a nonfiction entitled Ghostwriter, The Polaroid Ghost and Other True Tales of the Paranormal. What's it all about?
Yeah, the first half of the book, it's actually divided into two parts. The first part are my own true ghost stories and those of my family and friends, basically. Some of the stories I told you, and then a bunch of others, maybe, The second half of the book is about phenomena. I have a friend named John Matkowski, who we actually went to film school together in Philadelphia before I went to AFI, and we became friends, and then I moved out to California, and he moved out and crashed at my place until he, and we became roommates for a while. And then his father gave him money to buy a house in California. He had found a really great deal on a property up in the hills of East Los Angeles, Northeast Los Angeles, a place called Eagle Rock or Mount Washington. I'm not even sure which neighborhood he's in, but I've heard that people use both. But it's like a little log cabin type house. That was built also, and ironically, it was built in 1925, which is the same year that the house I'm in was built.
Oh, wow.
So maybe the house was built that year on it, I don't know. But there were some weird things that happened early on in the house. He had a roommate early on when he first bought it, and that roommate became so frightened of the house, he was hearing footsteps on the roof and insisting that they were like hobnail boots and whatever. He got so freaked out that he eventually moved out. And then I stayed there for 2 weeks around 1990, and I had some experiences that were a little strange. A lucid dream that was really kind of bizarre with his dog, who was a really sweet lab, appeared in it, but with these huge, like, vampire-type fangs.
Oh, my gosh.
And then after I woke up the next morning, I had 2 puncture marks on my foot. And they actually stayed on my foot for about a year after that. But the ghostwriter phenomenon actually started around 1993. John had a new roommate also named John Huckert, who moved in. And John Makowski was at work, and John Huckert was home. He's a screenwriter, and at the time he was a struggling screenwriter, and he was working at a desk, and he sensed something across the room. His parents had given him a Polaroid camera for Christmas, and he literally had only shot like 1 or 2 shots with it and didn't want to use it up because Polaroid was expensive. And when he told me that, I kind of found it a little shit. But then when I looked at the numbers on the film, it confirmed that he told the truth, that the same film was in there since the time he bought it. But anyway, what happened was he was sitting at his desk. He sensed something across the room, and he just he picked up the camera and took a picture, and nothing happened. And then he just continued to write, and then the bathroom door at that same area swung open. And at that point, he picked up the camera again and took another picture. And this time, a really startling image came out when the film developed. It was a really strange, ghostly image, which is on the cover of the book. And he snapped off like 2 or 3 photos in quick succession, basically. And the interesting thing is that the first image is of this weird, strange ghost. I call it the poodle skin because that's what it looks like. Somebody skinned the poodle, and the skin is just sort of floating in the air. And then the second one looks like the exact same image, except it's closer to the camera, and it's moving forward like in 3-dimensional space. Mm-hmm. And they're in the book in sequence, but it was really strange. So they got these images, and I saw them, and I was wondering about them, and I kind of suspected a hoax at the time. I'm not easily, although I'm a total believer because of the experience I've had, I'm also very, I'll really scrutinize everything really carefully. And they started to get ghostly messages from this entity. They would ask questions, and the ghost would answer. And it started at a party where they had some friends over, and they were talking about this. And one of their friends suggested, well, have you ever tried to communicate with it? And then he asked a question, and the word yes came out on an answer. But it was so broken up and garbled that it was really hard to decipher. And they finally did, and they figured out that they did get a response. And so they continued, and they started to get more and more advanced communication with this thing. But there were 2 things that sold me on it. One was I was at a party in 1994. They threw a Halloween party. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people came, and they brought their own Polaroid cameras and their own Polaroid film. And the first hour of the party was just like a typical cocktail party. Nobody, nothing was happening. It was pretty mellow. Everybody was talking. And I was outside on the patio talking to some friends. And all of a sudden, we heard all this murmuring in the house. And it was like the energy level just went up, like somebody flipped a switch. So I immediately went into the house to check, and everybody all at once started to get these ghostly pictures, basically. Wow. And there were actually 2 that I remember that were really striking, and I saw 2 different pictures that were taken. One was a young man came with a Grim Reaper costume, and somebody took a close-up photo of him, the side of his head, and there was this weird kind of fetal specter sort of like curved over his face. And it was really bizarre, but it was so striking that it just stuck in my head. And then the other one was a young man came dressed as Charlie Brown, the cartoon character. Right. And when somebody took a picture of him, and in front of his head was totally obscured by these weird little ghostly squiggles that looked like somebody, if they had been red, it would have looked like somebody had just blown his head off with a shotgun, basically. And he was so freaked out when he saw the picture that he left the party afterwards. But I remembered those 2 pictures, and then about 3 or 4 years later, John approached me and asked me if I wanted to write a book about the house, because he knew I had been talking about trying to get into writing books. Right. And so I thought it was a great project, and he gave me a whole box filled with VHS tapes. And back in, I think it was 93 or maybe 94, there was a TV show called Sightings. Yeah. And they sent a crew to investigate their house. And they were originally going to do a little 5 or 10 minute segment, but because it was so intriguing, they did an entire show on their house, basically. And they brought Perry Gaynor, who was one of the parapsychologists from UCLA, who had been involved in the entity investigation, and they also had a photographic expert from I think it was the Brooks Institute of Photography, and he came with a box of Polaroid film that had been sent from Polaroid. It was a sealed carton that had like half a dozen or a dozen sealed boxes of Polaroid film inside. And these videos that they gave me were the raw footage that the sightings crew shot, basically. And I saw them on one unbroken take. They pulled one of the fresh boxes out from the carton, logged the numbers, opened it up, handed it to John Matkowski. He loaded it into the camera. All this took place on camera, basically, on the video. Loaded it, and they said, okay, somebody asks a question, and then there's a woman in the room asks, are you an entity that's attached to a person or a place? And John snapped the photograph, and when it came out, the words genius loci were came out on the picture, basically, and they had different foreign language dictionaries because it had sometimes, communicated in French or Latin. So they looked it up in the Latin dictionary, and the first person opened theirs, and they said, oh, it's a spirit that's connected to a person or a place, whatever it was. And then Perry Gaynor opened his and goes, well, my dictionary says it's a person or a place. So it was like a really ambiguous kind of answer to, the question. And that's the typical, like, there are a lot of really concise and pithy, answers that this spirit gives. And supposedly, they asked its name, and it said its name was Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. And then when they investigated later, they found out that there had been a person named Wright who owned the property. I don't think he owned the house. I don't think the house was built there, or maybe an earlier house was built there, but I think he owned the property back in the late 1800s. So it's a pretty interesting story. But then later, when I was doing the book, I got interrupted, and then I came back east. And when I went to restart working on the book, I contacted John, and I asked him if he would send me the photographs, and he sent me a bunch of them. And I didn't see the ones that I had mentioned before of the two different guys.
Right.
There were, the two different photos, and I asked if he could find them. And he sent me a photo, and he said, is this the one you're talking about? And it was actually a third photo that was snapped by somebody else, but it was a wide-angle shot, and it included both of those two guys in the photo, and the same phenomenon was present in this photo, too.
Unreal. Stand by, Joe. We've got to take our final break for this hour. Joe Augustyn is our special guest. His website is wildcatpress.net. And Joe is the author of Ghostwriter, The Polaroid Ghost, and Other Tales, True Tales of the Paranormal. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. With each new extreme weather event or terrorist act, it becomes increasingly obvious that we live in uncertain and challenging times. We all buy car insurance. Why not collapse and catastrophe insurance? Matthew Stein, an MIT-trained engineer and green builder, has written 2 outstanding books to help people prepare, plan for, and deal with everything from minor situations lasting a few days to full-on collapse. Matt's first book, When Technology Fails, is a manual for self-reliance, sustainable living, and surviving the long emergency. This massive book covers the gamut from first aid and emergency preparedness to alternative healing, renewable energy, primitive living skills, and 18th century technologies that could be critical to your comfort and survival in a long-lasting crisis. Matt's second book, When Disaster Strikes, is a comprehensive emergency preparedness handbook and survival guide. When Disaster Strikes is an essential item for every family's go bag. Both books are available at all usual sources. There's a wealth of totally free information posted at whentechfails.com, and author-signed copies may be purchased at mattstein.com. That's www.mattstein.com. whentechfails.com and www.matstein.com.